The sun in the Valley of the Kings is not a friend. It is a hammer. It beats down on the back of your neck, it bakes the dust until the air itself feels gritty in your throat, and it bleaches the world to shades of white and pale brown. My father said the gods buried their secrets here because only the most stubborn or the most foolish of men would dare to look for them. For 8 seasons, I had decided the Englishman, the one we called Carter Bay, was the most stubborn man alive. Some of the other men, the ones who swung the picks and carried the baskets of rubble, they said he was simply mad. My name is Omar, and in that long, hot autumn of 1922, I was 13 years old. My job was simple, I was a seki, a water boy. From sunup to sundown, I hauled 2 heavy clay jugs, called kullas, on a wooden yoke across my shoulders. The water inside would sweat through the porous clay, keeping it cool, a small miracle in that furnace of a valley. I moved between the diggers, their backs dark with sweat, their faces caked in limestone dust, and I would pour the cool water into their cupped hands or onto the cloths they wrapped around their heads. It was a good job for a boy. It meant I was always near the heart of things, hearing the whispers, seeing the moods of the great men, and learning the rhythm of the search. The rhythm that year was one of despair. Carter Bay had been digging in this valley for what felt like an eternity. He was a small, neat man with a fierce mustache and eyes that seemed to burn with a private fire. He was not like the other Englishmen who came to Egypt. He spoke our language, not perfectly, but well enough to shout orders and to argue about the price of beans. He understood the land. But the land was not giving him what he wanted. He was searching for one king in particular, a boy pharaoh named Tutankhamun, a ghost that no one else seemed to believe in. His money came from another Englishman, a tall, elegant man named Lord Carnarvon. We just called him the Lord. He would arrive every winter on a great ship, bringing with him fine clothes and an air of patience that was beginning to wear thin. My father, who was one of the foremen, a Rice, told me this was to be the last season. The Lord had spent a fortune, and the valley had given him nothing but broken pots and the tombs of lesser nobles, already plundered by thieves thousands of years before. The mood on the dig site was heavy, like the air before a dust storm. The men worked, but the songs they used to sing to pace their digging had grown quiet. Hope was a resource more precious than water, and the well was running dry. I remember the day it all changed. It was the 4th of November. The air was thick and still, the sun already relentless. I was making my rounds near the base of the tomb of Ramesses VI, a place we had dug before. The ground there was cluttered with the ruins of ancient workers' huts, and Carter Bay had, in a fit of what seemed like final, desperate tidiness, decided to clear them away. It felt like pointless work, like sweeping a floor that would only be covered in dust again tomorrow. A boy a little older than me, Hussein Abdel Rasoul, was part of my water-carrying team. He was clumsy, always tripping over his own feet. He had set his water jar down on a patch of ground and, in turning, his heel caught on something hard, buried just beneath the surface. He stumbled with a yelp. Normally, one of the overseers would have shouted at him for his carelessness, but something was different. Hussein looked down, his eyes wide. He had not tripped on a loose rock. He had uncovered the sharp, clean edge of a step, cut into the bedrock. Silence fell over that small patch of the valley. It was a strange, sudden thing. The constant chip 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 of the picks stopped. The murmur of voices died away. Every man turned to look. Carter Bay was in his tent, going over his maps for the 1000th time. Someone ran to fetch him. My father was there, his face unreadable. He put a hand on Hussein's shoulder, not in praise, but as if to steady the world itself, which had suddenly tilted on its axis. When Carter Bey arrived, he moved with a speed I had never seen in him. He knelt, his neat trousers immediately covered in white dust, and ran his fingers along the edge of the stone. He didn't speak. He just brushed away the sand and pebbles with his own hands, his breath coming in short, sharp puffs. He looked up at my father. "Get the men," he said, his voice a low, tight whisper. "All of them. Here. Now." For the rest of that day, and the next, and the next, the valley was transformed. The despair was gone, replaced by a frantic, electric energy. The men worked with a new fire in their eyes. The rhythmic chants returned, louder than ever, as they swung their picks and hauled the baskets of limestone chippings up the growing flight of stairs. I barely had time to fill my cullas. My arms ached, my shoulders burned from the yoke, but I couldn't feel it. I was caught in the current, just like everyone else. With every basket of rubble that was carried away, another step was revealed. One step became 3, then 5, then 12. A staircase, descending into the belly of the earth. Carter Bey was a man possessed. He barely ate. He barely slept. He stayed at the edge of the cutting, watching, directing, his face a mask of intense concentration. I would bring him water, and he would take it without even looking at me, his eyes fixed on the deepening shadow in the rock. The staircase ended at a wall of plastered stones. A doorway. My father and the other senior Rice examined the plaster. It was ancient. And in the center, they found the seals. They were faint, blurred by time, but unmistakable. The jackal and the 9 bound captives, the royal seal of the necropolis. This meant the tomb had been officially sealed. It did not mean it was untouched. There were signs of a resealing, a smaller, patched up section of the door. "Grave robbers," my father murmured. They had been here. The question that hung in the air, unspoken, was, how much had they taken? Carter Bey sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. It was a very famous telegram, I learned later. "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival, congratulations." He then ordered the men to fill the entire staircase back in with sand and rubble. We were all stunned. To uncover this miracle and then bury it again? It felt like a madness. But Carter Bey was thinking of security. The Valley of the Kings had heirs, and news of treasure traveled faster than the wind. He posted guards, and for 2.5 weeks, the world held its breath. For us, life returned to a strange kind of normal, but everything was different. We were no longer just digging in the dust. We were sitting on top of the biggest secret in the world. The men would gather at night, their voices low, speculating. Was it a noble? A queen? Or was it him? Was it the golden boy, Tutankhamun? The name felt like a prayer on their lips. Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn, arrived on the 23rd of November. The excitement returned, a fever tenfold what it had been before. The Lord was calm, but you could see the thrill in his eyes. Lady Evelyn was young and beautiful, and she looked at the dusty, rugged valley with a kind of awe that made me feel proud of my home, a place I had only ever thought of as hot and difficult. The re-excavation began. It was slower this time, more careful. Every basket of rubble was sifted. Every broken piece of pottery was saved. I remember the sound of the small whisk brooms Carter Bey used, the soft shhh as he cleared the final layer of dust from the sealed doorway. The air was thick with anticipation. It was late afternoon on the 26th of November. The sun was beginning to dip behind the western cliffs, casting long, sharp shadows. A crowd had gathered at the top of the cutting, other archaeologists, officials from Cairo, and us, the workers, watching from a respectful distance. Carter Bey stood before the first sealed door. His assistant, a man named Calendar, stood beside him, holding a heavy iron bar. Carter Bey took a deep breath, his knuckles white as he gripped a small chisel. He found a spot in the upper left corner of the doorway, a place where the ancient robbers had broken through and replastered. He began to chip away. The sound was small, tiny in the vast silence of the valley, but it echoed like a drum beat. Asterisk tink. Tink. Tink asterisk. A small hole appeared. A dark void. Carter Bey took a candle and held it up to the opening, testing for foul gases. The flame flickered but held steady. For a long moment, he was completely still, peering into the blackness. The candle's light danced, making his shadow huge and unsteady on the rock wall behind him. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint buzzing of a fly near my ear. Lord Carnarvon, unable to bear the silence any longer, finally asked, his voice cracking with strain, "Can you see anything?" Carter Bey turned his head slowly. He seemed dazed, as if he had just woken from a long dream. He licked his lips, which were dry and dusty. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out at first. He cleared his throat. And then he said the words that I will remember until the day I die. "Yes," he whispered, his voice full of a wonder so profound it seemed to shake him. "Wonderful things." He widened the hole, and soon Lord Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn were taking their turns to peer into the darkness. Their gasps were audible from where I stood. I saw Lady Evelyn put a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. What was in there? What could make these powerful, worldly people react with such raw, childish awe? The work of opening the door properly took time. But eventually, it was done. Electric lamps were brought down, casting a harsh, bright light into the passage beyond. We, the workers, were not allowed inside, not yet. We could only stand at the top of the stairs, craning our necks, trying to catch a glimpse. But we could hear them. We could hear the sharp intakes of breath, the murmured exclamations. "My God! Incredible! Look at that!" Later, my father, as a Rais, was one of the first of the Egyptians allowed to look inside. When he came back out, his face was pale beneath his sun-darkened skin. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a strange light. "It is not a tomb," he said, his voice low and raspy. "It is a house of treasure. Gilded chariots, couches carved like great beasts, chests of ebony and ivory. And gold. Omar, the gold, it shines. It shines as if the sun itself is trapped in that room." He said it was chaos, but a divine chaos. Everything was piled together, hastily, as if the priests had been rushing. And beyond that first room, that ante-chamber, he had seen another doorway. This one was smaller, flanked by two life-sized black statues of the king, like sentinels guarding a final secret. And on that door, the seals were unbroken. This was it. This was the burial chamber. The boy king was still there. He had slept, undisturbed, for more than 3,000 years. The world went mad. That is the only way to describe it. The quiet valley became a circus. Journalists and photographers and wealthy tourists arrived in droves. They came on donkeys and in new motor cars that choked the air with fumes. They brought cameras with flashes that popped like gunfire. They stood at the top of the cutting for hours, hoping for a glimpse of Carter Bay or a piece of treasure being carried out. Our work changed. We were no longer just diggers, we were guardians. The treasures began to emerge from the darkness, carried out into the light of our time. It was a slow, painstaking process. Each object had to be photographed, documented, and carefully preserved before it could be moved. I saw things that I could not have imagined in my wildest dreams. A golden throne, covered in intricate carvings of the king and his young queen. Alabaster vases so thin you could almost see through them. Strange, beautiful chests filled with the king's clothes and his childhood toys. I remember one object in particular. It was a small, painted box. On its lid was a scene of the king, Tutankhamun, hunting lions from his chariot. He looked so young, so full of life and power. He was not just a name in Carter Bay's books anymore. He was a boy, not much older than I was, who had loved and hunted and ruled in this very same land. He had felt this same sun on his skin, breathed this same dusty air. He was not a god or a myth. He was an ancestor. My father and I would sit by our small fire at night, after the foreigners had gone to their hotel in Luxor. The stars in the valley are brighter than anywhere else on earth, so bright they look like spilled diamonds on black velvet. They say there is a curse, I said to him one night, repeating the whispers that had started to spread among the workers and the tourists. The curse of the pharaohs, on any who disturbed their sleep. My father took a long sip of his sweet mint tea. He looked at the entrance to the tomb, which was now covered by a heavy steel gate. Men create curses to explain things they do not understand, he said quietly. Fear is a curse. Greed is a curse. The king is not angry, Omar. He is just sleeping. And these men have woken him up. What matters now is that they treat him with respect. He pointed a finger at the tomb. That is not just gold and wood in there. It is memory. It is the spirit of our land. The foreigners see treasure. We must see a king. The work continued for months, for years. The antechamber was cleared, and then, in February of the next year, they opened the sealed door to the burial chamber. I was there, of course, with my water jugs, standing at the top of the stairs. The moment they pulled down the final wall was even more tense than the first opening. Inside, they found that the chamber was almost entirely filled by a gigantic golden shrine. It was a box of gilded wood, covered in sacred texts, so large it left only a few inches of space to walk around it. It was breathtaking. And inside that shrine, there was another. And another inside that. 4 shrines in total, nested one inside the other like a set of puzzle boxes. It took more than a year to carefully dismantle them. And inside the last one, they found it. The sarcophagus. A single, massive block of yellow quartzite, with a granite lid. When they finally hoisted that lid, the world saw the final wonder. A coffin, shaped like the king, made of solid gold. And another inside that. And a third, the one that held the mummy itself, also of solid, beaten gold. And on the face of the boy king, placed directly on his linen wrappings, was the mask. I only saw it for a moment, as they carried it carefully up the ramp and into the winter sunlight. I was close enough to see the details. The blue glass and lapis lazuli of the striped headdress, the vulture and the cobra on his brow, the calm, sad, beautiful golden face. It was not the face of a god. It was the face of a boy. A boy who had been loved and mourned, a boy who had been laid to rest with all the splendor his kingdom could muster, in the hope that he would live forever. In that moment, the heat, and the dust and the years of work all faded away. The crowd was silent. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the valley, a sound that had not changed in 3,000 years. I looked at that golden face, and I felt a connection, a thread stretching back through time. He was my ancestor. Not by blood, perhaps, but by the land we shared. He was a boy of the Nile, just as I was. Lord Carnarvon died a few months after the tomb was opened, from an infected mosquito bite. The newspapers screamed that it was the curse. Other people connected to the dig fell ill or had misfortunes over the years, and with each one, the story of the curse grew. But my father lived to be a very old man. I grew up, and I had children of my own, and I told them the story. I told them of the stubborn Englishman and the patient lord, of the heat and the dust and the day a clumsy boy tripped over a stone and changed the world. And I told them about the moment I saw the golden mask. I told them that the greatest treasure we found in that valley was not the gold, or the jewels, or the magnificent chariots. It was the story. The story of a boy who became a king, and who slept for millennia in the heart of the mountain, waiting for the world to remember him. The sun is still a hammer in the valley of the kings, but now, when I feel its heat, I think of him. I think of the immortal gold, buried deep in the rock, and the boy who showed us that the past is never truly gone. It is only sleeping, waiting for us to find the first step. The world saw the gold, but we who stayed saw the work. After the mask was carried into the sun, a new kind of quiet settled over the tomb, a hum of serious purpose that was almost more intense than the frantic energy of discovery. The tourists and the journalists were still there, buzzing like flies at the top of the ramp, but down below, in the cool, still air of the tomb, a new chapter began. It was the chapter of memory, of putting a life back together from the pieces a king had left behind. Carter Bay changed. The fire of the hunt in his eyes was replaced by the patient, focused glow of a watchmaker. He had found his prize, now he had to understand it. My life changed, too. I was no longer just the Saki. My father, seeing the trust Carter Bay placed in him, arranged for me to work as a general assistant inside the tomb complex. It was not glorious work. I cleaned brushes, I carefully carried trays of small artifacts to the makeshift laboratory they had set up in the empty tomb of Seti II, and I learned to be invisible. I learned to move silently in the cramped spaces, to listen to the quiet conversations between Carter and his specialists, men who could look at a piece of linen and tell you the year it was woven, or at a seed and tell you what the pharaoh ate for his final meal. The laboratory was a strange world of its own. The air, which in the valley was thick with dust and sun, here smelled of chemicals and old, dry wood. Electric lights on long cables cast stark shadows, making the ancient painted walls of Seti's tomb seem to flicker and dance. Here, the treasures that had been brought out with such ceremony were treated not as sacred relics, but as problems to be solved. A beautiful gilded bow, warped by 3,000 years of dampness, was slowly straightened in a humidifying box. A pair of the king's delicate linen gloves, so fragile they looked like cobwebs, were painstakingly preserved by a woman with hands as steady as a surgeon's. It was here I began to understand what my father meant. The foreigners did not just see treasure. They saw a story, and they were trying to read its pages. They were obsessed with the details. I watched Mr. Mace, Carter's assistant, spend an entire week working on a single ornate casket, his face inches from the surface, cleaning it with a tiny brush and a puff of air. He talked to it, sometimes. "There now, you see," he would murmur. Just a bit of dust. He treated the object with a tenderness I had only ever seen a mother give to her child. But outside the quiet of the lab, the world was still spinning its own story, one of curses and dark magic. It started with small things. Carter had brought a canary in a cage to the valley, a spot of bright yellow and cheerful song in our world of brown and white. The men loved it. They called it the golden bird and said it was a sign of the luck that led us to the tomb. The day they breached the wall of the burial chamber, the canary was killed. A cobra, the very symbol of the pharaohs, had somehow gotten into the house and into its cage. The men fell silent when they heard the news. A cobra, in the winter? It was unheard of. They looked at each other, their eyes dark with an old fear. It was an omen, they whispered. The king's magic was awake. Then, in the spring, the terrible news came from Cairo. Lord Carnarvon was dead. A mosquito bite on his cheek, the same spot where the king's golden mask had a small blemish, had become infected, and the infection had taken his life. On the very night he died, all the lights in Cairo went out for several minutes, a massive power failure that no one could explain. The story of the curse exploded. It was in all the newspapers, from London to New York. They wrote that a carving above the tomb's entrance promised death to those who disturbed the pharaoh. There was no such carving, of course, but that did not matter. People wanted to believe in the magic. It was a better story than a mosquito and a weak constitution. Carter Bay dismissed it all as nonsense. Rot and tomfoolery, he would snap if anyone mentioned it. But I saw the strain on his face. He grew thinner, his temper shorter. The weight of the world's attention, and the responsibility for this unparalleled treasure, was immense. And there was still the final secret to uncover. The king himself. For more than 2 years after the initial discovery, the body of Tutankhamun lay within its nest of golden coffins inside the stone sarcophagus. The work of clearing the burial chamber, of dismantling the great golden shrines, was slow and delicate. But finally, the day came. In the late autumn of 1925, they were ready to open the final, solid gold coffin and examine the mummy. A group of officials and scientists were invited to witness it. My father was there, as was I, standing quietly in the corner of the burial chamber. The space was incredibly cramped. With the open sarcophagus and all the equipment, there was barely room to breathe. The air was heavy with the scent of ancient resins and perfumes, a sweet, spicy smell that had been sealed in the darkness for millennia. The electric lights hummed, their glare harsh on the golden faces of the goddesses carved on the sarcophagus walls. Professor Douglas Derry, an anatomist from the medical school in Cairo, was to perform the examination. He was a tall, serious man with a calm demeanor. He and Carter lifted the heavy lid of the third coffin. Everyone leaned in. And there he was. He was smaller than I had imagined. A slight figure, shrouded in dark, hardened linen wrappings. A river of unguents and oils, poured over him in his burial rites, had solidified over the centuries, gluing the mummy to the bottom of the golden coffin. He was not just wrapped, he was encased. And he was covered, absolutely covered, in jewels. Amulets of lapis and carnelian, golden collars, bracelets, rings, and daggers were tucked into every fold of his wrappings. It was a treasure trove all on its own. But to get to the king, they had to remove the treasure. And to remove the treasure, they had to break through the hardened resin and cut the linen bandages. I watched, my heart a tight knot in my chest. The process felt brutal, a violation. Professor Derry worked with his scalpels, carefully, methodically, but it was still the act of taking a man apart. They unwrapped his head first. The linen was peeled back layer by layer. And then, his face was revealed. It was not the serene, golden face of the mask. It was the face of a real boy, shrunken and blackened by the embalming process, but unmistakably human. His features were fine, delicate. You could see the curve of his brow, the shape of his nose, the peaceful, closed eyelids. He looked like a child asleep. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. The whirring of the cameras stopped. The scientists held their breath. In that small, crowded chamber, 3,000 years fell away. We were not archaeologists and workers looking at a specimen. We were men, standing in the presence of a dead king. A dead boy. My father made a soft sound, a prayer under his breath. I looked at him and saw that his eyes were wet. He was not looking at the gold or the jewels. He was looking at the boy. The examination continued for hours. They measured his bones, noted a healed fracture on his leg, examined his teeth. They worked with scientific detachment, calling out numbers and observations. Carter Bay was at the center of it all, his face a mask of concentration, taking notes, conferring with Derry. He was discovering the final truths of his king. The boy had been about 18 or 19 when he died. He had been slight of build. He was our king, flesh and bone. As they worked, they uncovered more than 140 objects wrapped within the bandages. Tiny golden amulets to protect his limbs, beautiful daggers, rings for every finger. It was a map of a kingdom's love and fear, a desperate attempt to arm their young ruler for his journey into the afterlife. But the most moving thing was the simplest. Tucked over his heart, beneath layers of linen, was a small, delicate wreath of flowers. Cornflowers and olive leaves, woven together. They were faded and brittle, but you could still see their shape. Someone, probably his young wife, Ankhesenamun, had placed them there in a final act of love before the coffin was sealed. Those flowers, more than all the gold in Egypt, told the real story. They spoke of a grief so profound it could still be felt in that room, 33 centuries later. That night, after the mummy had been rewrapped and placed back in the outer coffin, my father and I walked back to our village under the brilliant desert stars. We didn't speak for a long time. The valley was quiet again, the ghosts returned to their sleep. They have his secrets now, I said finally, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. They know how tall he was, and how he died. My father stopped and looked back at the dark slit in the cliffside that was the tomb's entrance. They have his measurements, he corrected me gently. But they do not have his secrets. They do not know what he dreamed of. They do not know if he was happy, or if he was afraid. They have the body, but the boy is gone. The spirit, the BA, is on its journey. He put his hand on my shoulder. His hand was calloused and strong from a lifetime of working the stone and earth of this valley. Do not let the science fool you, Omar, he said. It is good to learn, to know things. But it is more important to remember. Carter Bay has given the world a great gift. He has made the world remember this king. But we have always known he was here. He is part of the mountain. He is in the water of the Nile. The curse the foreigners talk about is a story to sell newspapers. The real curse is to be forgotten. And that is a curse this boy will never suffer again. I never forgot his words. I continued to work in the valley for many years. I saw Carter Bay grow old, a man who had achieved his life's dream but who seemed to find little peace in it. I saw the treasures of Tutankhamun packed into thousands of crates and sent on their own journey to the museum in Cairo. I grew up, I married, and I brought my own son to the valley, showing him the place where a clumsy boy once stumbled on a hidden step. The world remembers the gold, the mask, the curse. But I remember the quiet things. I remember the smell of ancient resins, the sight of a professor's gentle hands, and the faded, fragile flowers placed on a young king's heart. That is the treasure I carry with me. Not the gold of a pharaoh, but the simple, human story of a boy, just like me, who lived and died under this same, unforgiving sun.